8-year-old orphan boy lost in the snow faced a wolf. What happened next was a miracle. If you've ever felt completely alone in this world, then you'll understand what this little boy was facing. Before we begin, please hit that like button and subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers. It truly means everything. The mountains don't care if you're 8 years old. They don't care if you're tired or hungry, or if the only thing keeping you warm is a threadbare scarf your mother wrapped around your neck 3 winters ago. The wind cuts through the pines like a whisper turned cruel, and the snow, endless, merciless, buries every footprint you leave behind. His name was Samuel, though no one had called him that in months. At the orphanage, they called him the Quiet One, or sometimes nothing at all. He'd become a ghost long before he ran away. But tonight, stumbling through drifts that reached his waist, he was more alive than he'd been in years. Alive with fear, alive with cold, alive with the terrible freedom of having nothing left to lose. The lantern in his hand flickered. Its oil was nearly spent, just like him. Inside his coat pocket, folded and refolded 100 times, was a photograph. His mother, smiling on a summer day that felt like a dream now. He touched it through the fabric, a small prayer without words. The blizzard was getting worse. Samuel could barely see 10 feet ahead. His fingers were numb, his lips cracked and bleeding from the dry cold. He knew he should find shelter, a cave, a hollow tree, anything, but every direction looked the same. White upon white upon white, and the darkness pressing in from all sides. Then he heard it, a howl, low and long, rising through the wind like smoke. Not close, but not far either. Samuel stopped walking. His heart, already hammering from exhaustion, began to race for a different reason. He'd heard the stories the older boys told at the orphanage, stories about wolves in these mountains, about children who wandered too far and were never seen again. He wanted to run, but his legs were shaking. He wanted to scream, but his voice was frozen in his throat. So he stood there, a small figure in an ocean of snow, holding a dying lantern and a photograph of a woman who couldn't save him anymore. The howl came again, closer this time, and Samuel realized that maybe he hadn't escaped the orphanage at all. Maybe he just traded one kind of prison for another, one made of ice and teeth and hunger that wore fur. He took a breath. The cold burned his lungs. And then he started walking again, because what else could he do? The tree had fallen years ago, maybe decades. Its massive trunk lay across the snow like a broken bridge, roots torn from the earth and twisted toward the sky. Beneath it was a hollow space. Not much, but enough for a boy to crawl inside and escape the wind. Samuel collapsed into the shelter, gasping. His whole body was shaking now, not just from cold, but from something deeper, the kind of exhaustion that settles into your bones and tells you to sleep, to give up, to let the snow cover you like a blanket. He curled into himself, pulling his knees to his chest, and tried to breathe. The lantern had finally died. Darkness wrapped around him, complete and total. That's when he saw them. 2 eyes, gleaming yellow-green in the blackness. 30 feet away, maybe less. Watching him with an intelligence that made his stomach drop. The wolf was huge. Even in the shadows, Samuel could see the shape of it. Broad shoulders, thick fur dusted with snow, breath steaming in the frozen air. It moved closer, one careful step at a time, its paws silent on the ground. Samuel pressed himself against the tree trunk. His mind screamed at him to run, but his body wouldn't obey. He was trapped, cornered. And somewhere in the rational part of his brain that was still working, he understood that running would only trigger the chase. The wolf stopped 10 feet away. Its ears were forward, alert. Its eyes never left Samuel's face. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The wind howled through the trees, and somewhere far off an owl called, but here in this small hollow beneath a fallen giant, time seemed to stop. Samuel's hand found his coat pocket. Inside was the last thing he had from the orphanage, a piece of bread he'd stolen from the kitchen before he ran. It was hard now, frozen, barely a meal for a sparrow. But it was all he had. He didn't know why he did what he did next. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was the loneliness that had been eating him alive since his mother died. Maybe he just wanted to offer something to the world before it took everything from him. He pulled out the bread and, with a shaking hand, broke it in half. Then he tossed one piece into the snow between them. The wolf's ears twitched. Its head lowered, sniffing. "I know you're hungry, too," Samuel whispered. His voice cracked. "I know what that feels like." The wolf took a step forward, then another. It lowered its massive head and picked up the bread in its jaws, swallowing it in one quick motion. Then it looked at Samuel again, and something in its expression changed, softened, maybe, or became curious in a way that felt less like predator and more like something else. Samuel held out the other half of the bread, the last food he had in the world. "Here," he said, "you need it more than me." The wolf approached slowly, cautiously. It took the bread from his palm with surprising gentleness, its warm breath ghosting over Samuel's frozen fingers. And then, instead of leaving, instead of disappearing back into the storm, the wolf lay down. Right there, 3 feet away, close enough that Samuel could feel the heat radiating from its body. Close enough that, for the first time since he'd run into the blizzard, Samuel felt something other than cold. He felt less alone. His eyes grew heavy. The wolf's breathing was steady, rhythmic. And despite everything, despite the fear, despite the cold, despite the impossibility of what was happening, Samuel let himself sleep. When you have nothing left, sometimes mercy comes from the strangest places. Morning arrived, not with sunlight, but with a shift in the quality of darkness. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world transformed. Every branch dressed in white, every stone softened into curves, the silence so complete it felt like the earth was holding its breath. Samuel opened his eyes slowly. His body ached everywhere, stiff from cold and the hard ground beneath him. For a moment, he couldn't remember where he was. Then he saw the wolf. It was still there, sitting now, watching the forest with ears pricked forward, its profile noble and alert against the pale morning. When Samuel stirred, the wolf's head turned toward him, and their eyes met. There was no aggression in that gaze, no threat, just a steady, patient regard that seemed to say, "Get up. We're not finished yet." Samuel struggled to his feet, his muscles screaming in protest. He was desperately thirsty, desperately hungry, and somewhere beneath all of that was a quiet certainty that he probably wouldn't survive another night out here. But the wolf stood too, shaking snow from its thick fur, and began to walk. Not away, not toward him, just walking as if it expected Samuel to follow. And so he did. They moved through the forest like an odd pair of travelers, the boy stumbling through drifts that barely slowed the wolf, the animal occasionally pausing to wait for him to catch up. Samuel's mind couldn't make sense of it. Wolves didn't do this. They didn't guide lost children. They didn't stay when there was no food to be gained. Yet here it was, leading him with purpose down through a valley he never would have found on his own. The wolf stopped at a frozen stream. The ice was thick, opaque, and stretched across rocks that would have been treacherous to cross. But the wolf didn't step onto it. Instead, it moved upstream, nose to the ground, until it found a place where stones broke the surface and the ice was thin enough to break through. Samuel watched in wonder as the wolf used its paw to crack the ice, revealing running water beneath. He dropped to his knees and drank, the cold liquid burning his throat like fire and mercy all at once. The wolf waited, patient as stone. They continued. The terrain grew steeper, more dangerous. Twice, Samuel almost stepped onto what looked like solid ground, but what the wolf avoided. Hidden ravines disguised by snow bridges that would have swallowed him whole. Each time, the wolf blocked his path with its body, forcing him to take a different route. It was protecting him. There was no other explanation. By midday, they crested a ridge, and Samuel saw it. A cabin in a clearing below, small and weathered but standing strong. Smoke rose from its chimney in a thin gray line, and even from this distance, Samuel could see the warm glow of firelight in the windows. His heart leaped. Shelter, warmth, maybe even food, maybe even help. He turned to the wolf, something like gratitude swelling in his chest. "Thank you," he whispered. "I don't know why you helped me, but thank you." The wolf looked at him for a long moment. Then it looked at the cabin, and then, without warning, It turned and walked back into the forest. "Wait," Samuel called out. "Don't you want to?" But the wolf didn't stop. It moved between the trees like a shadow, dissolving into deeper shadows, and within seconds it was gone. Only its tracks remained, leading back the way they'd come, already beginning to fill with fresh snow. Samuel stood alone on the ridge, the cabin waiting below. His chest felt tight with an emotion he couldn't name, gratitude and grief all tangled together. The wolf had brought him here to safety and then left, like it had known all along where he needed to be. He started down the slope toward the cabin, his legs weak but moving. With every step, he felt the weight of what had just happened settling over him like a blanket. He'd been saved by a wolf. Not attacked, not hunted, saved, and he didn't understand it, but he didn't need to. Some miracles don't come with explanations. The cabin door was solid oak, scarred and weathered by decades of mountain winters. Samuel stood before it for a long time, his hand raised to knock, his courage wavering. What if whoever lived here turned him away? What if they called the orphanage? What if they looked at him with pity, or worse, with nothing at all? But the cold was seeping back into his bones, and his body had nothing left to give. He knocked. 3 small sounds that seemed to disappear into the vast silence of the mountains. For a moment, nothing. Then, footsteps. Slow, careful. The sound of someone old, someone who'd learned not to hurry. The door opened. The woman who stood there was perhaps 70, with silver hair pulled back in a loose bun and eyes the color of winter sky. Pale blue, searching kind. She wore a simple wool dress and a shawl around her shoulders, and her hands, wrinkled and strong, gripped the doorframe as she looked down at Samuel. Her expression shifted through several emotions in quick succession: surprise, concern, and then something deeper that Samuel couldn't quite read. Recognition, maybe, though he'd never seen her before in his life. "Child," she said softly. Her voice had the texture of smoke and honey. "What on earth are you doing out here?" Samuel tried to speak, but his throat closed up. All the words he'd prepared, the lies about being lost on a hike with family, the stories he'd practiced, dissolved like snow on warm ground. Instead, tears came, hot and shameful and unstoppable. The woman, Mrs. Helena, he would learn later, didn't hesitate. She pulled him inside and closed the door against the cold. The warmth of the cabin hit him like a physical force, and his legs nearly gave out. "Sit," she commanded gently, guiding him to a chair near the fireplace. The room was small but immaculate. Wooden floors, simple furniture, and everywhere the smell of something cooking. Soup, rich with vegetables and herbs. Samuel's stomach cramped with hunger. Mrs. Helena disappeared into what must have been a kitchen and returned with a thick blanket. She wrapped it around his shoulders, then knelt before him, this old woman, kneeling for him, and began unlacing his frozen boots with careful, practiced hands. "You're going to be all right," she said, not looking at his face. "But you need to get warm, slowly. Too fast, and it'll hurt worse than the cold. Do you understand?" Samuel nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. She brought him soup in a wooden bowl and a piece of bread with butter that melted into golden pools. "Small bites," she instructed. "Your stomach needs to remember how to do this." As he ate, she sat in the chair across from him and watched him with those searching eyes. Not judging, not demanding answers, just watching the way someone might watch a bird with a broken wing, wanting to help but not wanting to scare it away. Finally, when the worst of his shaking had stopped, she spoke. "You ran away from somewhere." It wasn't a question. Samuel looked down at his hands. Slowly, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the photograph. Crumpled, worn at the edges, but still clear enough to see the woman in it, young and smiling in a summer dress. "My mother," he whispered. "She died last year. They sent me to St. Catherine's orphanage. I couldn't stay there anymore." Mrs. Helena took the photograph with gentle fingers. She stared at it for a long time, and Samuel saw her eyes fill with tears. When she looked up at him again, her expression was complicated, sorrow and wonder and something that looked almost like pain. "I had a grandson once," she said quietly. "Benjamin. He would have been about your age now, if he'd lived." He and his parents, my daughter, were traveling through these mountains 8 years ago when their car went off the road in a storm. They found a car 3 days later. Found my daughter and her husband. But Benjamin. She paused, swallowing hard. They never found Benjamin. Samuel's chest tightened. I'm sorry. She smiled, but it was fragile. Every winter since then, I've kept this cabin warm. Kept the fire going. Kept soup on the stove. I told myself it was foolish, that I was an old woman clinging to impossible hope. But I couldn't help thinking, what if he survived somehow? What if he's out there, cold and scared, and he'd find his way here? She handed the photograph back to Samuel. You're not my Benjamin. I know that. But you're someone's boy, and you're here, and that's enough. If this story is touching your heart, please hit that like button right now. It helps more than you know. Outside, through the window, Samuel thought he saw movement in the tree line, a shape, large and gray, watching. But when he blinked, it was gone. Only tracks in the snow remained, leading away into the forest. Mrs. Helena followed his gaze, then looked at him with curiosity. How did you find this place, child? These woods are vast, and this cabin isn't marked on any map. Samuel opened his mouth to answer, then closed it. How would he explain? Who would believe him? A wolf, he said finally. A wolf showed me the way. Mrs. Helena was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled, really smiled with her whole face. My husband used to say that God sends what we need in forms we don't expect. I suppose he was right. She stood and moved to the window, looking out at the darkening forest. Whatever brought you here, Samuel, you're safe now. And if you'll let me, I'd like you to stay. At least through the winter. Maybe longer, if you'd want that. Samuel felt something crack open in his chest, something that had been frozen solid for a very long time. Yes, he whispered. I'd want that. Morning light came through the small bedroom window in shafts of pale gold, painting patterns on the quilt that Mrs. Helena had tucked around Samuel the night before. He woke slowly, confused for a moment about where he was, before memory returned. The cabin, the warmth, the old woman who'd taken him in without hesitation. He sat up and realized someone had laid out clean clothes on the chair beside the bed. A flannel shirt, wool pants, thick socks. His own clothes, he noticed, were gone, probably being washed. The kindness of it made his throat tight. He dressed and made his way to the main room. The fire was already crackling, and the smell of coffee and frying eggs filled the air. Mrs. Helena stood at the stove, humming something low and melodic. Good morning, Samuel, she said without turning. I hope you're hungry. I made enough for two. The table was set with simple plates, cloth napkins, and a jar of what looked like homemade jam. Samuel sat down, overwhelmed by the ordinariness of it all, the sacred ordinariness of a home, of someone caring whether you were hungry, of a place at a table that had your name on it. They ate in comfortable silence. The eggs were perfect, the bread toasted just right. Samuel couldn't remember the last time he'd had a meal that wasn't served on a metal tray in a loud cafeteria. After breakfast, Mrs. Helena poured herself a second cup of coffee and looked at him with gentle seriousness. I've been thinking, she said, about what happens next. I can contact the authorities, let them know you're safe. Or, she paused, choosing her words carefully. Or we can take our time, figure things out properly. I have some friends in town, good people who understand that sometimes the system doesn't serve children the way it should. If you want to stay here, truly stay. We can make that happen. Legally. Properly. Samuel stared at her, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. You do that? For me. I'd do it for any child who needed it, she said simply. But yes, for you especially. This house has been too quiet for too long, Samuel. And I think, her voice caught slightly, I think maybe you were meant to find your way here. Not by accident, by something bigger than both of us. Samuel got up from his chair and moved to the window, looking out at the forest. The snow sparkled in the morning sun, pristine and beautiful. And there, at the edge of the clearing, he saw them. Tracks. Large, canine, leading from the tree line to the cabin and then away again, disappearing into the woods. Do you think it's still out there? He asked quietly. The wolf. Mrs. Helena joined him at the window. I think it did what it needed to do. Animals know things we don't, Samuel. They see the world differently. Maybe that wolf knew you needed help, and maybe it knew where to bring you. Or maybe, she smiled, maybe it was never just a wolf at all. Samuel thought about that, about yellow eyes in the darkness, about shared bread, about the patient way the animal had led him through dangerous terrain to safety, about how it had left the moment its job was done. My mother used to say that angels don't always have wings, he said softly. She said sometimes they have fur or wrinkled hands or the kind eyes. She said we just have to know how to see them. Mrs. Helena put her arm around his shoulders. Your mother sounds like she was a very wise woman. She was. They stood there together, watching the forest, watching the way the light moved through the trees. Somewhere out there, Samuel knew the wolf was running free, racing through snow, hunting, living the wild life it was meant to live. And maybe it would never think of him again. Or maybe, in whatever way wolves thought, it would remember the small boy it saved and feel something like satisfaction. He would never forget it. That was certain. Mrs. Helena squeezed his shoulder gently. Why don't you help me with the dishes, and then we can take a walk into town? I want to introduce you to some people. Let them know you're here. Let them know you're home. Home. The words settled over Samuel like the quilt from the night before, warm and protective and real. Okay, he said. I'd like that. As they moved away from the window, Samuel took one last look at the forest. The tracks were already beginning to fade, filled in by fresh snow falling from the branches above. Soon they'd be gone entirely, as if the wolf had never existed at all. But Samuel would know. He would carry the memory of those yellow eyes, that patient presence, that impossible rescue for the rest of his life. And when he grew up, when he became the kind of man who helped others, who looked for lost things, who believed in second chances, he would understand that miracles aren't always loud or obvious. Sometimes they come on four legs in a frozen night. Sometimes they come in the form of a lonely widow who kept her hearth warm, just in case. Sometimes they come when you break your last piece of bread in half and offer it to the darkness, not knowing what will answer. This is the end of Samuel's story, but maybe it's the beginning of something in your own heart. If this touched you, please hit that like button and subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers. And in the comments, tell me, where are you watching from? What city, what state? I'd love to know that this story traveled across the miles to find you, just like Samuel found his way home. Because that's what we all need sometimes, to know we're not alone. To know that help can come from unexpected places. To know that even in the coldest, darkest moments, there's still light waiting somewhere ahead. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And remember, keep your hearth warm. You never know who might need it.